In this video, I want to explain again, because I did it before, but I'm going to do it briefly now. I want to explain why cults work. A sect is a deviation from a group. So if you have a group called hip-hoppers and you have this small part of hip-hoppers that deviates from standard hip-hop, then that deviating group, which still identifies as hip-hoppers, but they deviate from the what makes hip-hoppers, that group is a sect. A cult is when a group of people agree on a tunnel vision collectively, which implies that there is a way of thinking they adhere to and they all refuse to question the way of thinking. That's what a cult is. Let me say it one more time. A cult is when a group of people agree on a tunnel vision. And to agree on a tunnel vision implies that there is a way of thinking that they cling onto, and they all refuse to question that way of thinking that they are clinging onto. That is what a cult is. Now, why are cults successful? In a sense, why do cults work? How is it that even people with a high education or people with a high IQ fall for cults? It's not just the poor layman out there that falls into traps that cults put out there. Let me say it like this. Anyone, with very few exceptions, anyone can fall into a cult. Because nobody joins a cult by saying, I'm going to join a cult. Unless you are a businessman and you want to make millions, kind of, then you have to sell your soul to the devil. But that's different, okay? In general, nobody decides, I'm going to join a group that restricts themselves and holds on to vain restrictions that they want to question. Nobody consciously does that. But still, many fall for cults. And after they're not even aware, they become part of a cult. Here's why cults work. Very simple. They are practical. That's it. Cults are practical. The human being has three core needs: safety, security, and significance. Significance is a very important need. If that one is frustrated, the human being is dysfunctional. The human being will still be operative in a mechanical manner. That means he stands up, he showers, he goes to his job, he's polite, but he is dysfunctional, yet operative. And this dysfunction causes dis-ease in the mind. The mind has this urge that something is missing. And that's natural because human beings ought to find their significance in serving their creator. But if people are not serving their creator, who is Christ, then this dysfunction needs something else to compensate for. So because there's dysfunction, because they don't function as they should, that means to glorify the creator, this dysfunction will demand a compensation. And worldly people are all seeking compensation somewhere. And that's where cults come in, because cults offer compensation. That's what cults do. They offer a compensation. And that compensation is mental. It's not a physical compensation, because physical compensations are expensive and they are limited. So if you begin to offer physical compensation, you'll get fights, rivalries, which will cause trouble, and physical compensations will not trigger the internal need to be significant. So cults offer a mental placate to the deficit worldly people have. And it works like this. When you have a group of people that all agree strongly upon something. That strong agreement binds them together. And everyone that's part of that agreement becomes significant to that agreement. So in the context of that agreement, they feel important. And that's how, instead of serving Christ and their need for significance being met in Christ, their need for significance is met imperfectly by being part of that agreement. I said imperfectly because that strong agreement can never replace the longing for Christ. It can placate the deficit, but can never meet the deficit. But it's still effective. So let's say you have a group of people who really can't stand foul language. Foul language is language deemed unworthy by a group. Why is it deemed unworthy? Nobody knows. It's just that people know that it's deemed unworthy. So everyone agrees that certain words and phrases are unworthy. So they agree with that. So in their daily lives, they don't use certain words. And because of this, they now feel important. Because the mission is avoid foul language. So there is a suggestion there's something as a good language. And if you use good language, you are included, you're accepted. So the need for significance is triggered by the promise of acceptance. That's the mental compensation. And the hatred towards foul language is just a tool for someone to feel significant. So when you have a group of people like that, they form a cult. Even if they have disagreements amongst one another about other things, there's one thing they strongly agree upon, and that is that foul language is the best. And in order to secure this agreement, they act out against anyone that violates their expectation. And their expectation is you don't use foul language. If you do, they take action against you. They forget that you're a human being with human needs. They treat you as a debased entity upon whom they can vent their frustration. Because when you don't meet their expectation, they feel frustrated. So now they dump the frustration on you, and it's your responsibility. They have boundaries. And boundaries are self-inflicted limitations. And as long as you honor and limit yourself according to their self-inflicted limitations, they are okay with you. If you don't, they perceive you as a threat, and they sometimes will even deny that you exist. Why? Because if they acknowledge you exist and that you are doing well without submitting to their unexamined expectations, that means that they cannot pretend anymore as if their unexamined expectations are valuable. And their need for significance depends on their ignorance. Because if their ignorance is destroyed, then they would see through the strong agreements they agree with. So to protect the strong agreements, the people agree never to question them. And anyone that questions them is punished. It's harm or harms inflicted upon them. So they become the target of violence. And that's how cults operate. And it works. When people feel connected to one another, due to some strong agreement, they tend to invest in this agreement. And that means they will hang around those that are in line with that agreement. And that's how people form long-term bonds with one another. And those long-term bonds will result in sexual relationships often that will bring forth children. So families are formed. And that's how culture develops. I just explained how culture develops. There's a strong agreement. People adhere to this agreement, and they never question the agreement. Therefore, the frustration that comes from this bondage, was it creates bondage. The frustration they vent onto scapegoats or people that violate the expectations of the strong agreement. And because people collide together, they form long-term bonds. Now you have families being formed, and the strong agreement is transferred from one generation to the next. That's how culture develops. That's how culture is sustained. Cults when it's practiced by hundreds of thousands of people, it's culture. You can have subcultures which are shared by thousands of people, but culture in general, I'm not talking about subcultures, but real cultures in general, are cults that perpetuate themselves over more than 2 generations. If a cult transferred across 2 generations, it's a culture. Because then many people either validated its existence or they just tolerate its existence, so folks are in agreement with it. It works because people form bonds, and human beings are creatures that need social bonds. So it masks the absence of walking by faith. And this deficit is not only covered by the strong agreement, but it's also maintained by collective violence. So now you understand why scapegoating is so important to the world. Because without scapegoating, you have no protection of the strong agreement. Without a strong agreement, you don't have those social bonds. Without those social bonds, there is no common purpose for the people. And without a common purpose, why would they live? Why would they be kind towards one another? Why would they put up with difficulties? Because during this lifetime you will encounter difficulties. And this won't always go your way. So you will need to endure and deal with other people. And what motivates human beings to endure with other people is if they have a common purpose. But this common purpose can only remain intact if nobody challenges it. The moment there's a challenge to it, there's dysfunction in the group. And this dysfunction can lead to violence, and violence tends to escalate. So, by forming a cult, you transfer the negativity that's on the inside to the outside. And how do you do that? You select one of your own members of the group who's vulnerable, and you dump the frustrations on that individual, and that's how the rest is relieved of frustrations, and they keep colliding together in families, in marriages, you name it. So that's why cults work. Cults are practical. Culture is practical. Now look, a culture is different than a tiny cult. I hope you understand that. In a tiny cult, let's say you have 40 or 50 or 60 people that join together, you have one strong leader, often a man, or one family that's at the top. It's in a small location, and that's it. Often that small cult dissolves when the leader dies. In culture, you need institutions to keep the culture going. So not only do you have hundreds of thousands of people that are in agreement with something, but now you have a group of people that form an organization. That organization needs to keep everyone in check with a strong agreement. Those organizations that keep people in check with a strong agreements, that's what we call institutions. And institutions have projects. And those projects are intended to keep people in line with a strong agreement. And the enforcement of these projects are policies. So you can't have institutions nor policies, because policies imply that there's an institution with projects. You can't have any of that as long as there's a strong agreement that people never question. And it's this strong agreement that produces violence and frustration amongst the members of the group, because the members of the group need one another. They need clothes, they need water, they need food, they need social interaction. So because they need one another, they are triggered into wanting to collide with one another. And if you have a strong agreement, everyone just has to give in to the agreement, and the priests or those that lead the institutions, they'll come with explanations why some bad stuff happened to some people and why it's okay to be violent towards some people. It works. And cultures need to be similar for them to be able to coexist with one another. If you have one culture in which women are treated as trash openly, and then you have a culture that kind of idolizes women as these perfect innocent creatures, those two cultures are not compatible. If you have migrants from culture A, where women are treated as trash, migrating into our territory where culture B, that idolizes women, let me say this, so the migrants from culture A into territory of culture B, they will cause dysfunction in the community of culture B. But if you have a culture that treats women as trash, and you have another culture that treats women as the lesser being, not as trash, but as the lesser being, those two cultures, even though they have a difference, they may complement one another. Because in both cultures, there's an underlying agreement that women are defect. So the strong agreements are similar, so they can collide. It has nothing to do with biology, because there's one race, a human race. It has to do with agreements. Haven't you noticed that some corporations, if you want to work there, you need to have a certain mindset? Because those corporations are cults. That's what they are. You think it's a corporation because you need to go to work to pay the rent or to pay your mortgage. And because you have this need to get currency to pay for food, water, and for a place to stay and accommodation, because of that, you think I need to work somewhere in order to get a paycheck, so you get along with the agreement of that organization where you work. And that's how you're drawn into a cult, because that organization is a cult. That's why in many corporations, I'm not saying all, but in many corporations, you have much exploitation, often sexual exploitation going on, and people just don't deal with it. Why? Because that corporation is a cult. And the only way you can succeed in that organization is if you are in agreement with the strong agreement of that organization. I've explained it clearly to you now. I explained it clearly to you now. Cults work because they are practical. And that is why controlled opposition is so easy. Because to organize as individuals is difficult, especially if there are many interests involved. But if you have a cult that comes with a strong agreement, people only have to align with the strong agreement, and you have a bunch of people joining a movement. And this movement may claim to be against establishment, against the abuse that's going on. And that may be true. But it's just a cult that has developed because people were fed up. Because when people are fed up and they want to leave, that's the best time to recruit them. The best moment to recruit someone into a cult is when they're upset and they want to leave. So what you do is you cause frustration, and once the individual is frustrated and they want to leave, now you offer the solution, and solution will draw them into some strong agreement in which you become part of a cult. That's how you initiate people without them being aware they've been initiated. That's why there are some evils people don't question. For example, hitting children. Or that's something a lot of people don't question. Because if they question the right of a parent or some authority figure to hit kids, then they also need to question all the other things that binds them together as a group. And once you do that, there's no cohesion in the group. There's no cohesion in the group left, and all the investments that they hold on to will vanish. It will all dissolve. And because people value those investments, those emotional investments so much, they will put up with evils like hitting children. And they will use any type of justification to justify it. That's how cults work. If you're part of a cult, some things will go much smoother for you. For example, getting a job, if you're part of a cult, then most likely you will seek out people from that cult and you get employment quicker. If you want to look for a marriage partner or just a sex partner and you're part of a cult, the people collide together, so they stick together, so you most likely get someone from the opposite sex from that cult. If you're part of a cult, things go smooth for you because you operate under the spell of that strong agreement. The moment you are delivered from that spell, I'm not saying you are delivered as a human being, but the moment you're delivered from that spell, you can't collide that easily anymore with those people. And then you will experience dysfunction. But it's not you that's dysfunctional, it's them that submit to the dysfunction of the strong agreement. That's why there are folks that don't want to hear anything about deliverance because they are only into seeking relief. When it comes down to it, they want to be part of a cult that hides their dysfunction. They want to be left alone, and cults offer extended relief. That's why many people flow into cults. And all cults, let's say like this, all cultures are led by pagans. And the pagan rulers of this world are the elite, the top that govern the cultures of this world. Well, that's it for now. I hope this video has edified you. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.